I euthanized 10 animals today, and since they could not live to see the end of this Homeless Companion Animals Day, I would like to share their names with you. We had a cat named Taz, who I was going to tell you about tonight, and whose collar I wear. We're all wearing collars of animals that we've euthanized. But instead, I'll tell you about another cat, a stray domestic long-hair blue cream tortoiseshell who was brought into our shelter 29 days ago. She was a very pretty cat. She loved kittens, and she didn't have any with her when she came in, but when she was allowed out of her cage for exercise, she would run up to the cages with the kittens in them and try to clean them by licking them. And if any kitten began to cry in our cat room, she would become all alarmed, and I'd have to go over to her and pat her and assure her that the kitten was all right. On the days when our shelter is closed, I had let her out of her cage to stretch out on my desk, and she'd try to play with my pen while I tried to do my paperwork. And then finally, almost 2 weeks ago, she became the cat that had been at the shelter the longest. So I had her photographed and made her pet of the week in our local newspaper. And unfortunately, not one person called. No one cared to ask where this stray cat had come from. No one cared that she was beautiful. No one cared that she got along with cats and dogs. No one cared that she was young or that she had silky fur or that she liked to clean kittens or stretch out on a desk or play with a pen. So today, when the other unwanted cats came through our door, filling our cat room beyond capacity, I lovingly took her life.
In the early 1990s, shelter workers in New Hampshire were putting about 12,000 cats and dogs to death every year to make room for other animals that had become homeless. Usually, shelters kept quiet about the large number of pets they had to put down. They worried that if people knew that animals that came to shelters were more likely to be put down than find new homes, they would abandon pets they couldn't keep instead of bringing them to a shelter.
If there were 5 million animals that died every year because of feline leukemia or rabies, you can bet that there would be media coverage from one end of the country to the other. Well, 5 million animals are killed every year at least, probably more than that, in shelters in this country. It's a plague, and people don't talk about it. Animals are killed one animal at a time in New Hampshire shelters by one animal shelter worker or a pair of shelter workers at a time, and they're individual tragedies. It's hard for people to understand what killing 12,000 animals means. You really, it's just a statistic. But if you look at individual animals and know that each individual animal has a history and a family and perhaps a name and a story, and that their deaths are individual tragic stories, that's the way to understand what pet overpopulation really is.
In 1991, Barbara Carr, the director of the Cocheco Valley Humane Society in Dover, New Hampshire, helped form a New Hampshire advocacy group called Solutions to Overpopulation of Pets, or STOP, to undertake a public information and awareness campaign about pet overpopulation. Throughout the campaign, STOP used photos and stories of individual cats and dogs that had been euthanized. In 1992, STOP worked with shelters and rescue groups to hold a candlelight vigil for homeless animals. At the vigil, shelter workers told about some of the cats and dogs they had euthanized, like the cat who loved kittens. To prepare for the vigil, staff at shelters throughout the state made a collar for each animal that had been euthanized at their shelter during the first 7 months of 1992. The afternoon of the vigil, they put all the collars together in a single chain of collars. Many people were overwhelmed when they saw how long the chain stretched.
I've worked at the Valley for 5 years, and I was totally unprepared to see these chains going on and on, endless. As we looked at them, looking for the ones from Cocheco Valley, each time I thought I found it, each time I thought I recognized the name, I realized it was another shelter. The nameless cats, the nameless dogs, the Fidos, the TJs, the Chucks. I mean, they're at everyone's shelter. And I wasn't prepared. I hope next year the chain is shorter.
When Killing Our Best Friends was produced in 1994, many shelter workers were angry at the irresponsibility of people in their community.
It's a real paradox that those animals have to die in our hands. We're the ones that love them the most, and we're the ones that have to bring about their deaths. We don't kill them. The general public is killing them. We simply perform the act of euthanasia.
After seeing the support they received from the public in their legislative campaigns and the candlelight vigil, some shelter managers began to take another look at their relationships with people in their community.
I used to say, we're in the newspaper a lot, but we weren't on the page you wanted to be on. We were generally the topic of a lot of letters to the editor, and it wasn't, boy, we love our Humane Society. And there was one letter in particular from a gentleman who adopted from us, who went home and read the standard contract that we used at the time, that probably pretty similar to the contracts that a lot of shelters still use. But if you really look at these things and the 24 or so items in there, it included things like, we reserve the right to, or by signing this, you agree to give us free run to show up at your house anytime, unannounced, and inspect the quality of care you're providing for this animal. We can take this animal back from you at any time, yada, yada, yada. And he was so offended by what he read that he wrote a letter to the editor that was pretty articulate. It was pretty forceful. And he accused us, as many people had, of preferring to kill the animals than place them in homes. And there was something about that particular day and that particular letter. And it's never fun to take a hard look at yourself. But after the first couple of responses that I wrote that I didn't publish, I finally had to write an honest response, which was, you're right and we're sorry, and we're going to change it.
You might think, well, that's really our goal is just to adopt the animals that we have. But I think that the goal of a humane community involves more than just the animal shelter. The animal shelter is only a very small piece of the bigger pie, and I think the community has to come together to develop creative solutions for animals, and the shelter certainly has a role. But I think the days are gone when we can expect our shelter to do everything for animals in our community, because they can't.
It had to start from us. It had to be, we had to take a look at what we were doing and to realize that most of the people in the community actually cared about animals, but they were looking to us for some leadership. And, we're the Humane Society, we're the institution. We should have been providing leadership. And somehow we got ourselves into this, this position of, getting this problem off of people's streets. And I don't think that's really what they wanted. I think they wanted us to do better. They definitely wanted us to do better, because every time we did, they came out in droves to support us.
When Killing Our Best Friends was made, an animal control officer from the Manchester Animal Shelter operated a small shelter at the city landfill. A couple of years later, a group of local animal lovers known as the Friends of the Manchester Animal Shelter built a shelter and began to take care of the animals impounded by the city's animal control officer and place them in new homes.
This shelter's been here for about 15 years. It all started across the street. It was just manned by the city itself and the animal control officer. And a group of volunteers formed a committee called the Friends of Manchester Animal Shelter. And they raised money. They raised $200,000 back then. And they came and they built this building on city property. It's run by a board of directors. We are nonprofit. We're a no-kill shelter. We only have a staff of 4. We have probably over 100 volunteers. They come, some of them come every day and clean cat cages and dog cages and walk dogs. And then we have volunteers that do off the premises fundraisers. We have several fundraisers during the year. We're small, but we crank out a lot.
Shelters throughout the state now make great use of volunteers and foster care programs.
The only way that we can deal with all the kittens that we get is through our foster program. So we have about 80 of our animals. If we have 280 animals that we're caring for right now, 80 of them are in foster programs or with foster families. And those are, 95% of those are cats and kittens.
The New Hampshire Humane Society could not survive without our volunteers and our foster care program. I mean, we have volunteers here that walk dogs, they socialize cats, they will do events for us, and with only 3 full-time people on staff, 3.
Shelters even began to give the benefit of the doubt to people who came to them to give up an animal.
15 years ago, when we had somebody arrive at our door, I would say that many of us were disgruntled. We were frustrated, we were angry. They were giving up on that animal. They had failed that animal. And so we were resentful. Today, we recognize that there are a variety of influences that affect a family and affect a relationship with a person and that animal, and that they've done the right thing by coming to us and surrendering it. They didn't abandon it on the street. They didn't leave it behind when they moved. And they didn't give it to somebody else who may or may not care for it. They gave it to us. We can then make sure that it's spayed and neutered, that it's microchipped, that it's vaccinated, that it has a full complement of medical care necessary and identification, and we can find it a forever home.
Several shelters began to replace an open-door admission policy, in which they immediately admitted every animal a person contacted them about giving up, with a more individualized admission process, guided by the particular needs of the animal and its situation.
Under the original open adoption model, we were thinking that the safest place for the animal was to come in. So if someone needed to surrender, you better take it right away. If not, they might just let it loose, and what a horrible fate that could be. And in reality, it was being found over and over again that we could engage these people in a conversation and treat them as an individual and look at all the possibilities at hand. So John calls up and, I need to surrender my animal. Excellent, John, what's your situation? I'm going to move. Great, when are you moving? Oh, I'm going to move next month. Fantastic. How about you hold on to your animal until a few days before you move. We could make an appointment, you bring the animal in on that day. One of 2 things happens. We've A, controlled our flow, and or B, a good percentage of the time, John finds a solution, a friend or a relative that will take his pet or finds an opportunity to keep his pet in that time frame. If we had taken the animal from him initially, we would have had too many animals on that day, presumably, and we would have lost the opportunity for that animal to never come into the shelter.
And then one day I happened to pick up the phone when somebody was calling about bringing their cat in that afternoon to the shelter. And just on a whim, she was an older woman, she was very nice, but she said, I have to bring my cat in today for you to take in the shelter. And so I talked to her a little bit, and she needed to move. She was moving into some elderly housing. She couldn't take the cat with her. But she wasn't moving for a couple of months. But she had decided the cat had to come in that day. And so normally, I mean, up until that point, we would just say, okay, well, you know, these are the hours we're open, and the cat comes in. And I just said, what the heck? You know, I'm going to try something different. And so I said to her, well, if you bring the cat in today, there's a very good chance that we'll have to euthanize the cat because we don't have any room right now in the shelter. But if you think you could hang on to this cat for 2 more weeks, I can almost guarantee that we'll have the space and we could adopt this animal out. And I'm wondering which sounds better to you. And she didn't even skip a beat. I mean, she said, oh, well, then I'll keep him for 2 weeks. What day do you want me to bring him in? It was like, you know, all this time we'd just been saying, yes, here's our hours. Yes, here's our hours. Yes, here's our hours. And, you know, and that conversation, you know, it was just a beginning. It was just sort of a crack in the door. I think what we learned, and it took us an awful long time to learn it, but what we learned from these sort of series of experiences with our community was if we changed the contract, if we talked to them differently about what was going on, they wanted to help every time. Every time. So, you know, that's sort of, I think, for me, definitely, that's where the whole idea of humane community came from.
At the time of killing our best friends in 1994, shelters and rescue groups often found themselves at odds with each other over their different points of view.
We're in this to save them, not to put them down. So I don't know that I would associate myself with a kill shelter. I have a hard time with the whole philosophy of kill shelter. And I know there's probably a million reasons why it works and why it needs to happen, but if I'm going to choose, and I would choose to do one that is definitely a non-kill.
After working together on the Candlelight Vigil and the successful campaign to set up a state-funded spay-neuter program, shelters and rescue groups began to meet to see how they could better work together.
When I first started Feline Friends, shelters did just euthanize. And I can remember being at meetings where we sat together in a large room and then the facilitator would say, okay, kills one end of the table and non-kills at the other, and we were the only ones at the other end of the table. That's the way it was. We were just looking at each other with, we do this and you do that. We looked at our differences and we never looked at what we did together, what we could do, the likenesses with each other. And after I think we got past that, we're all in it for the cats. How can we do this best? And we sort of gave each other that respect and let a little of that control go. We found that, okay, they can do something really well. They're experts at that. We can do this better, so let's help each other to help that cat or that dog. And that's how it kind of evolved.
Sometimes you can kind of get in your own ego and think that I'm the humaniac and I'm got all the answers and I know what's best, but you've got people coming to you that are humaniacs too, and they love animals, and that's why they come to you, and they have things that they can teach you also.
And once you meet people and you talk to people, that's the key too. You learn that they are a person, and they may not see it the way you see it, they may not like what you do, and you may not like what they do, but you know what? The ground is the same. We're here to help. We're here to help animals, so let's get on the same page and let's help them. And that's what you have to do. And there was times when I sat at meetings and people would say, and I cringe, and I go, oh, are you kidding me? Feral cats don't need to die. And you know, but I sat quietly and listened, and we, learned to respect one another, and okay, we learned.
After seeing TNR, or Trap, Neuter, Return programs operated by feral cat rescue groups, in which the cats are trapped, sterilized, and returned back to the place where they live, many shelters began to question whether they should continue to admit feral cats just to euthanize them.
Carter Luke from the MSPCA gave this really stirring talk at a New England Fed conference about, if I was one of those cats that we euthanize every day, I might be tapping myself on the shoulder and saying, hey, are you sure there's no other possible option out there for me?
Should a feral cat be in a cage? I mean, anybody who works at a shelter and watches a feral cat in a cage goes, this is probably not the best environment for that cat. The traditional thing, well, better than being loose in the wild and suffering the fates that might come to that cat outside, certainly the best solution must be euthanasia. Well, is it? I don't know. If I were to ask the cat, what would you rather do? Continue to live out here and, presuming the cat is thriving, have that opportunity to do that again, or not? And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that most of those cats are going to choose to be free roaming and continue to be that way.
What you want to do is look at your mission and say, well, if our mission is to do this for these cats, why would feral cats be left out of it? So if you're a facility that you years ago, we used to rent out traps. People would trap a feral cat and they would bring it in, and then we would euthanize that. And so we had to challenge ourselves and say, because you're going to tell yourself that this is the best thing for that cat. And if you can drive home at night believing that that's the truth and that's the best thing for that cat is to be euthanized and not go ahead and live its life, I couldn't. You have to challenge your own mission statement and then ask yourself, really? And so that's part of what we were doing. We were asking ourselves, really? Really, is this the best thing for this cat?
One of the other programs that I work on is our barn cat program. And there was a time when we would not do the barn cat program. If we took in a feral cat, we would have to euthanize it for behavior purposes, or we may not even be able to assist the property owner. And now we're nearly inundated, especially in the summertime, with folks that have colonies, and either if they're willing to keep them, then we help them with TNR, and we'll actually trap the cats, bring them, fix them, and return them. That's our favorite because we know that they have a home. And then in some cases where the animals can't stay there, we're bringing them in, we're housing them here. We're fortunate enough to have a quarantine room where we don't have a lot of foot traffic. So only trained staff or staff that have the rabies vaccine, the pre-exposure vaccine, will go in there and work with these feral cats and place them in barn homes. And we never would have done that, and now we do that, and that's wonderful.
So we ended up deciding, okay, it was better if we all got around the same table and we figured out how to work together, as opposed to we start factioning off, because the public already thinks, and rightfully so in many cases, that we're a bunch of lunatics. We did. We had these huge, you can call them therapy sessions. We had these big meetings around no-kill and our agreements about how we were going to work together. And was there a niche for everybody to fill? And of course there was. And then there were a lot of empty niches. You know, if we wanted to be really honest, there was room for everybody and then some.
When Killing Our Best Friends was produced, it seemed like the day would never come when shelters would be able to stop putting down cats and dogs just to make room for other animals that had become homeless.
To feed and maintain and shelter these animals and then have to go in there and then decide who do we put down is very difficult. We like to adopt out every animal that we impound. Obviously that's impossible. Sometimes we have to put very healthy social animals to sleep.
16 years ago when I started here, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get to the day when we're not euthanizing dogs and cats and kittens for space, because you just can't think any other way. Everybody works at a shelter works there because they love animals. So you can't go into it thinking, I'm going to spend the next 15, 20 years of my life euthanizing animals that people don't want. You come into it thinking, I'm going to make things better. I'm going to make things better for the animals in my community in New Hampshire. I'm going to do what I can to help get to zero euthanasia for space, because, you know, how could it be any other way?
No, we don't euthanize an animal for anything for time, space, or money.
We never euthanize for space. We have 18 pens here. Occasionally there'll be, more than occasionally, you'll find a dog in a crate in, you know, the kitchen or the hallway, the smaller dogs. We work around that.
Unfortunately, our placement rate was about 54%. We're now at 95, 96%.
At first, many shelter managers were skeptical when rescue groups asked them if they would place dogs and puppies they were transporting into New Hampshire from shelters in other states.
When I think back to years ago when the conversation began, and we were horrified, quite frankly, horrified that we were transferring animals in after we were working so hard to reduce an overpopulation. How could we possibly be transferring animals?
When I first was on the board, or even as a volunteer back in 2002, I'd heard about transport dogs, and I could never understand, why do we need to bring in dogs? Don't we have enough dogs? I go, what a waste of time and money. That was my reaction.
Shelters began placing dogs and puppies brought into the state by transport programs just to save the lives of the transport animals. They discovered that it also helped save the lives of cats and dogs in their own shelters.
Transport dogs have added a tremendous value to the New Hampshire Humane Society. As I mentioned, people come in here, they said they're looking for the dog or the puppy, and they realize, well, that isn't really what I'm looking for. I really like a cat or an older dog. We had a situation last year where we didn't bring any transports in for close to 4 months. We literally only had 10 dogs in inventory at any one time. Those were local dogs. Nobody came in to adopt any dogs because it's the same 10 dogs they were looking at the website, and therefore nobody came in to look at cats. the cat population was stagnant. And you know, you're trying to have people come in, they love to look at the dogs on the website. The first thing they do is they look at it, they keep saying, well, there's Brian. Brian's still there. Brian's still there. Zeus is still there. Well, where's the puppies? Where's the dogs? Nothing. So for 4 to 5 months, literally no dogs were adopted. None. So nobody came in to see Brian and Zeus, and the cat population became stagnant. So we were sitting there showing that how this made it crystal clear why transport dogs are important to this organization, not only to save animals, but to save what we have here.
I was in awe. I'm still in awe. You know, I stop at a shelter like New Hampshire Humane or New Hampshire SPCA and see the marvelous facilities and how quickly the animals go out to wonderful homes. And I drive back home again and see that our shelters still have that need to get a lot of cats and dogs out. I think that sense of awe is still there, but it's also a great sense for me of promise, because I see it can be done.
I absolutely believe that the same philosophies and programs that we do here in New Hampshire can be applied anywhere. Many of them came from some of the other areas of the country.
What we did in New Hampshire to increase the live release rate significantly is something that can be replicated anywhere in the country.
I'm going to say it was 1997, and we were euthanizing animals for space, a presumed necessity at the time. We hadn't yet developed the resources, the capacity to work past that. And we were in the euthanasia room, and we were euthanizing this one young, pregnant calico cat. And somewhere in those seconds it took to euthanize that one cat, a switch went off in which, in my mind, the way we were doing things, we were going to work to do it completely differently, and that there were other answers. And I'm sure that countless other people in animal welfare have had their same moments where this is not the answer. This is not what I will continue to be part of. I'll be part of changing this, or I will not survive. And luckily, we had opportunities from that point forward to start looking at things differently and finding a new way to do things. The moment is on a pinhead when you go from going, this is okay, to this is not okay. There's a better way. We will find a better way. This is unacceptable. But that one cat, I mean, I don't think I will ever forget that one cat.